Hello.
Hi, Oriana.
see.
Well, let's
Yeah.
let's just start with like who's Oriana? How did she become the queen of Kickstarter? Let's say.
Well, I'm sure some of my colleagues might take issue with that designation, but yeah, I'm Oriana Leckert. I'm the director of publishing and comics outreach at Kickstarter. My background is about half and half traditional book publishing and digital media. So I started my career at Random House before they had absorbed Penguin. So you can see that I'm as old as the hills. I've worked in all across the traditional publishing landscape. I've done a lot of weird things. I've edited crossword puzzles. I've was a matchmaker for ghostwriters, a fact checker for a book packaging company, a reader for a literary agency. I've also been a freelance editor and proofreader and copy editor for more than 100 small presses and individual authors all across the country. I published a book about 5 years ago, which grew out of a long running sort of cultural investigation of underground art spaces all across Brooklyn. It's called Brooklyn Spaces, 50 Hubs of Culture and Creativity. When that was coming out, my publisher said, hey, maybe you could like do some writing on these topics. So that sort of accidentally launched into an arts and culture journalism career. I've written for Vice and Hyperallergic and MTV News. I've also edited for some of those sites as well. I was events editor for Gothamist and Brooklyn and various sites all across Brooklyn. So yeah, I've been kind of all over the place, all across the literary landscape. My job now, I manage all of publishing and comics and journalism on Kickstarter. So it's about 120 projects a week launching in my categories, sort of like managing all of those, seeing what's going on. My job really as outreach is to be out in the world of my categories, talking to folks, helping them figure out whether Kickstarter might make sense for what they're doing, and then helping to set them up for success if they decide that it does. So I guess to transition, just like a quick intro about where things are at with Kickstarter, literary Kickstarter right now. Despite all of the chaos and churn of 2020, it was the best year ever for both categories on Kickstarter. Each category separately brought in more than $10 million more in 2020 than they did in 2021. In 2019. Oh boy. In November, Kickstarter Publishing crossed a major milestone of $200 million pledged to the category through its lifetime. And a fun fact, so that's a fun fact about publishing, and a fun fact about comics is that currently it has, I believe, the highest success rate in any category on the site. Success today is 76.4% success rate for running a Kickstarter campaign in comics, more than double the site average. So kind of a good time to be doing Kickstarter for publishing and comics.
That's awesome. Speaking of success, can I introduce you to James Powell, who I believe you know by reputation, but maybe this is the first time you guys are meeting. He's got a Kickstarter happening right now.
Which is your campaign?
James?
That's the House of Fear.
We
exchanged a couple of emails.
Totally, but, for sure.
It's not a success yet, so I don't want to get too excited. It's close. Yeah.
Well, yeah, if I recall correctly.
I lost some pledges with the 48-hour reminder. You know how that goes when those emails go out. But we'll see. I am excited to see what happens in the last 24 hours. I've never been watching the numbers this late in the game, so it'll be interesting just to watch.
well, I'm pulling for you, and I'm very excited. You got less than $100 to go. I feel like.
It's actually 900. So
less than 1,000 is what I meant. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. 100 sounded great. I was like, wow, what happened in the last 15 minutes?
I'm sorry. Well, I'm really excited for you, and it's lovely to see your face.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for coming on and answering some questions and talking about the platform. It's awesome.
Absolutely.
Do you have any question, James? Something that might get you over the hump in these last couple of hours?
I think one of the questions that's been bouncing in my head is I've been watching my followers. I think this campaign I've had more than ever before. I think I have like 70 more than last campaign. And I was just curious, is there any way to target those in any way as far as emails or finding a way to entice them to back a campaign instead of just following and then not backing?
Yeah.
I know a lot of people have that question. I don't know what we can do with that number.
There's actually not much you can do with that number. That number specifically measures the reminder email that goes out at 48 hours. So those email addresses are not like recorded somewhere. There's no place that like you could get to them and like, write to those people. It's just kind of an internal Kickstarter thing. The people in that section on your dashboard, the project followers, either followed you at your pre-launch page or clicked remind at some time during the course of the campaign. They get emailed once, which has happened for you 22 hours ago or whatever, and that's it.
Can you maybe explain a little bit about the difference between, say, a follower and a backer as it pertains to the Kickstarter platform?
Totally. Yeah, so a backer is someone who has pledged to give you a certain amount of money in exchange for a reward or no reward. A follower is just someone who has acknowledged that they might like to back the campaign, but they're not ready to do so yet. So a follower, a backer is kind of yours. You can communicate to them through backer updates. Once the campaign closes and is successful, you'll get access to their email address and their dollar amount and their rewards here, et cetera. A follower is just kind of lurking, waiting to decide whether to convert to a backer or not.
So would it be fair to say that like a follower, like followers on Kickstarter is the closest to like Kickstarter functioning as a social media platform, maybe, where people are just...
Oh, yeah. Well, no, because a follower on a social platform will like get your missives. And in this case, they don't. It's just signing up for a reminder email. That's the only action that will happen for those followers.
Okay. Excellent.
But your backer,
I have
all of your backer updates. So those are, I guess you could consider that like it doesn't function the way a traditional social network functions, but any backer update you as a creator send will go to your backers, and anyone who has backed your campaign can comment on your project. So in that way, there is a sort of a two-way communication there.
I see. I have a couple of other questions that I sent you before. So let me just work my way through a couple of those. There are a handful of people here like James who have done Kickstarters before. And then there are also those of us who have yet to do one. And maybe there's a handful of folks who are hearing about Kickstarter for the first time here. I doubt it. But so let's say, what resources would you have for someone who's jumping onto Kickstarter for the first time? Like, what are the first things that they should do or be aware of?
Yeah. We could take up the whole time probably just answering that question. I will say I've got a creator resource page that is dedicated to publishing and comics creators. You can find it at kickstarter.com/creators/publishing. I can put it in this chat here. That is full of all kinds of videos and panels and webinars and articles about structuring your rewards and social media best practices, how to write a press release, how to determine your goal amount, the Kickstarter creator handbook, sort of everything that we can think of that would be helpful to someone embarking on the Kickstarter creator journey. I can go through kind of the main elements of a campaign, if that's a helpful way to sort of triangulate it. I mean, running a Kickstarter campaign is a lot of work. It has a lot of benefits. It's kind of the best way to speak directly to the people who are, your readers, your supporters, your audience, and hear what they have to say. So we certainly think there's a lot to recommend doing a Kickstarter campaign, so long as you, kind of go into it with your eyes open, that you've done a clear budgeting of what it's going to cost to produce both the book that you're making and any associated rewards that you might offer, and also your ability to reach your support network. Everybody thinks about the funding side of crowdfunding. Not everybody thinks about the crowd. So, you really do need to spend a lot of time figuring out who are your supporters, how are you going to get to them, and, whether they're going to be willing to support the work that you're doing right now. So those are some of the things that you want to think about when you're deciding that doing a Kickstarter campaign is right for you.
I see. I see. And so is there a difference between, in Kickstarter, difference between, say, publishing a comic, publishing graphic novels, publishing board books, children's books? Does that end up in a different category?
Yeah, we have all sorts of subcategories. I mean, publishing and comics are separate, I guess you'd say, super categories, but children's books, which would be board books, go under publishing. So yeah, I mean, we see different trends in backer behavior in publishing versus comics, which we have some theories about why that is, but yeah, you're sort of accessing a different potential audience in one versus the other.
And I understand that you can like switch categories midway.
Sure.
Have you encountered people who are like doing hybrid projects?
Sure, totally. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. An art book, for example, might go in publishing and then in letterpress and then in art. A book about music might go in the music category for some amount of time. Seen a lot of a film plus comic or a board game with reader's guide attached. So yeah, there's those decisions. The category that you put your project in is not going to have a super dramatic impact on whether or not you fund the most people who find your Kickstarter come to it because you told them to come there, whether you emailed them or they saw a tweet or a piece of press or anything like that. So with that action, they won't know or care what category it's in. So the category placement is more about random backers who are kind of on the site looking around for projects, and in different categories, the amount of those you might expect are pretty different. If you're running a tabletop games project, 60 to 75% of your backers might come just from people being on the site, because the backers in that category are, kind of inextricably entwined with the creators. Whereas in publishing, there's a far fewer number. You're probably going to see like 15 to 20% of your backers are going to come through just like somebody who typed in kickstarter.com/publishing to see what's going on.
Interesting. Yeah, so anecdotally, I always saw as board games as exploding on Kickstarter up until 2020. And then it seemed, so I mean, from my personal perspective, it seems like comics surpassed board games in terms of like the presence on Kickstarter. Would that be accurate, or is that just my own bias showing
in terms of their presence on Kickstarter? I mean, there's a lot of ways to measure that. Like board games are still making a lot more money than comics. I think there are more projects launching in board games than in games than in comics. I haven't done a side-by-side comparison. I think the success rate in comics is higher, and I think the kind of like the unmeasurable discourse, in the community. I mean, I'm not in a lot of discourse about games, but I am in a lot of discourse about comics. And I know that at this moment, pretty much everybody in the comics industry is like very happy with and excited about what's going on Kickstarter. So in that sense, I'm not sure if we've surpassed games, but yeah, it's, out in the world, Kickstarter become a really vibrant part of the landscape because of our efforts, but also just because of various shortcomings and disintegrations in the traditional comics industry, I think.
Sure. Plus, we got Keanu Reeves, right?
Totally. Yep. Game changer.
So how about for someone who's never like, let's say I have a campaign going, but a lot of my fans are just not tech savvy, right? They're not familiar with Kickstarter. Do you folks have how would you support that? How would one support those people who are who don't even understand what Kickstarter is as a platform?
Sure. I think when deciding whether to run a campaign, that's definitely something you're going to want to take into consideration. I've done talks with international groups where someone from Greece says that, Kickstarter is not that popular in Greece, and even crowdfunding as a concept isn't super well known. So, does it make sense for him where, first he's going to have to explain to everyone, like, what is crowdfunding, then explain what is Kickstarter, and only then be able to explain what is his project? That could be a stumbling block that makes it too large for him to decide that that's the way he wants to do his funding. I mean, if you know that the majority of your audience is not very much online, I'm not sure if Kickstarter is going to be the best route for you. It seems like that's going to be a lot of work to educate your community about what this is and how to support you. It can work. I mean, I have certainly seen people succeed who are doing a lot of education of their backers, but certainly, Kickstarter is online, it's part of the internet. And so
sure.
for those who understand, digital promotion and kind of how to find their way around on the internet.
Right. And how about such things as Backerkit, right? I know you guys have worked with other, I guess you can call that an affiliate program, or?
No, Backerkit isn't actually in any way associated with us, but they certainly are. They're a trusted company that does a lot of the sort of like stuff around a Kickstarter campaign. They help with, fulfillment. They do some marketing. There's things like that. We trust them. If creators, they are very much involved with all of the crowdfunding platforms, as far as I understand it. I've done some webinars with, and I did a panel a couple of years ago with Backerkit out in San Francisco. So we think that they are very good at what they do, but they're not technically aligned in any way at a business level with Kickstarter.
Right. Okay, I see. How about like times of the year? Have you noticed like specific times of the year that are really ideal? This is when there's the most activity on Kickstarter versus dead zones, we can call them.
Yeah, totally. The answers to that are squishier than you might think. I mean, setting aside 2020 where like everything went haywire, there's certainly historical seasonality in Kickstarter. For example, we don't recommend you to run projects in December. Unlike almost any other kind of commerce, Kickstarter doesn't really lend itself to the like holiday shopping season because the fulfillment timelines are so long. If you back a campaign in December, you're not getting it until June. So at the earliest, and also, everybody is just being, there's nothing but a cacophony of demands for your money. So we don't find that Kickstarters tend to break through very well in December. July and August also tend to be pretty slow. It's just a time when people are trying very hard to like be at the beach and not extremely online. Conversely, March and September are our busiest months. Again, time is a flat circle now, as we are all experiencing. We are all extremely online in very different ways than we used to be. And it's also it's a bit of a double-edged sword about when the site is busier, because in September, there are going to be way more projects than in August. So there's definitely more people just on the site, backing things and looking around, but there's also a lot more competition for their eyes. There's, it's harder to get placement in newsletter spots or social promotion, or, there's just more people out in the world promoting their campaigns, so it can be tougher to break through. So some very successful campaigns have intentionally run, in February or in July, because there's so little else going on. They can make a real big splash that way. So, ultimately, I would not, similarly to not getting too fixated on what subcategory makes the most sense, the seasonality of Kickstarter writ large is far less important than where are your backers and what are they doing. If you're running a campaign for a children's book, you probably don't want to run it in the summer when, parents are spending a lot of time with their kids out of school and not, necessarily on the internet. So think about where your people are and what they're doing at any given time, and let that dictate when to run your campaign, not any sort of like, what are, the giant smartwatch campaigns, what month of the year are they running? It has very little to do with the success of your book project.
Awesome. So was wondering if you could talk about some of your personal favorite campaigns that you've seen that have really opened your eyes or really inspired you.
Well, that is certainly a, choose your favorite children, but also, I've probably worked on hundreds of campaigns. One that recently closed that was very dear to my heart was Brink Literary, which is a literacy nonprofit. They work with incarcerated populations and homeless populations. They do a lot of really marvelous work. They have an annual literary magazine, which they have historically funded on Kickstarter. I think they've done 7 or 8 issues of that. But in 2020, they also have, as a nonprofit, an annual gala, which is what funds a lot of the work that they do. So in 2020, they were not able to do that. So they came to me and said, what can we do that's going to be, that's going to make as big of a splash as our galas do? And so we worked to brainstorm, and they wound up with this idea of a literary tarot deck. And so the concept was, for every card in the deck, they found a writer, artist, cartoonist, a prominent pop cultural figure, and assigned them a card and asked them to pair that card with a work of literature. The deck wound up having participation from everyone from Margaret Atwood to Kelly Sue DeConnick to Victor Laval, just an unbelievable array of luminaries in, the publishing and comics world. I think they raised $700,000 to make this like unbelievably gorgeous deck and, help them really, carry on the tremendous work that their nonprofit does. So that's a favorite. Another recent one that I got to work on, Jeff Smith, who wrote Bone. This is the 30-year anniversary of, multiple award-winning series Bone. He funded his latest work called Tukey Fight for Fire on Kickstarter. I think that was only last month, although really it's really hard to keep track of it. It was very exciting to see him on the platform, this like champion of self-publishing and this incredible comics icon. To get to work on his campaign was, an absolute delight. And, whereas with the Literary Tarot, I was working with them for many months and had in fact been working with them on previous projects for multiple years. The Tukey campaign, Jeff's wife DM'd me on Twitter, and I think less than a month later, the campaign was live. So there's an array of participation that I can have and do have with projects like that. So, none of this is to say that all campaigns can or should be raising six figures and, that you have to have won Eisner Awards to run a Kickstarter. It's absolutely something that can be done by any person at any part of their, literary and publishing journey. There's, I love small campaigns as well. I mean, I can run through what's on my list of things that are live right now that I love. There's a book called Black Metal Rainbows being produced by PM Press, who is out in Oregon. It's an anthology of queer, trans, and marginalized writers writing about Black metal and why it's not only for Nazis. There's an anthology called Lovecraft in a Time of Madness, which is comics inspired by H.P. Lovecraft. There's a beautiful book called Dias de Consuelo, which is a memoir as told to the author, by his abuela, I'm pretty sure.
Grandmother.
Yeah, by Dave Ortega. So that's up right now. Jeremy Hahn has an art book called Hanthology, which is the horror comics that he wrote during quarantine. There's a cookbook called Pizza is for Everyone by a chef out in Chicago collecting pizza recipes. So obviously, there's Nectar, which is an anthology of erotic comics by trans and non-binary cartoonists. We've got Dense Magazine, which is like a spotlight on New Jersey, just like a magazine about weird, cool, interesting things happening in New Jersey. Zainab is back on the platform with her Short Box, which is another semi-regular anthology project of collecting emerging indie comics writers. So I don't know, shall I stop? Shall I keep going?
I mean, I love all of it, but I do have one other question that maybe could, we could segue a little bit. When you mention working on these campaigns, what does that entail, right? Because most people think that they have to do it all themselves.
Yeah.
So
I have, I mean, certainly most creators are, there's, as I said, 120 projects launching in my categories each week. I'm not, in the weeds with most of those creators. Although, if you send me your draft campaign a week or two before you launch, I will almost always be able to make time to look it over and offer you some feedback. So that's typically the kind of help I can offer. I'm also, I curate my categories twice a week. So I'm clicking on every project that launches, seeing what's out there. offering suggestions where I can, advocating internally for placement in newsletters and social promotion and that sort of thing. So, Kickstarter is I'm very lucky to work here. It's a wonderful place to work. And I have a very broad leeway to figure out what it means to do my job. Usually things like this is how I work with creators, where I'm, speaking to panels, to audiences on, having conversations of this nature. But I'm also pretty findable on the internet. I'm at Oriana BKLYN on both Twitter and Instagram. You can always slide into my DMs, ask some questions. Just please bear in mind that I am but one woman running two very large categories. So give me a little time to get back to you.
They're going to get you some help, though, at least one would hope.
We'll see. Yeah, I'm hiring for 2 different consultants right now. I'm at the end of the process for a comics outreach consultant, and I'm actually going on vacation next week, which feels somewhat irresponsible, but hopefully will not be a big mistake. And when I get back from that, I'm looking to hire a consultant on the publishing side. I've got those interviews scheduled already. So we'll see. I'm actually not yet certain whether that will ultimately be less work for me or more, but if there's more people out there extolling the virtues of Kickstarter and kind of helping creators figure out how to fund their dreams, I'm all for that.
That's awesome. One thing I was wondering about is can you have you been able to identify the difference between folks like the Tukey campaign, someone who's well established, has a whole infrastructure behind them, versus Joe Schmo, who just has their one little project that they want to do, whether it's a cassette, a mixtape or something, or a comic, a zine.
The question is what? How do I tell the difference?
Can you identify what the proportions are? More indies?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I see. Yes. Kickstarter, Kickstarter is designed so that anyone can run a campaign. You don't need to be, a massive superstar in some way or another to be on the platform, because Kickstarter has always existed kind of outside of the traditional publishing landscape. We're really proud that we've always been a home for marginalized voices, smaller voices, people who for whatever reason have been overlooked by the kind of mainstream gatekeepers. Kickstarter is where they can come to find that success. So, again, not everyone should even aspire to $100,000 campaign. Many people are thrilled to do $1,000 or $5,000 or $8,000 campaigns, building their audience and their readership and their skills over time, or funding just one book. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Kickstarter, our platform is, in my opinion, the best for project-based fixed funding. So if you want to print a book and you need $5,000 to do it, Kickstarter is a place that, you can achieve that dream.
Awesome. I'm wondering if anyone else is getting inspired by some questions. There's a few people in the chat. With a 75% funding success rate, what patterns do you notice for the 25% that don't get funded?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think the answer will hopefully inspire you all. We have another metric here where we look at the success of projects that have at least 25 backers. And the success rate for those is wildly high. It's like in the 80th% in every category. Really, throughout Kickstarter's entire history, there is a small section of people who seemingly close their eyes, derp out a campaign, and just wait to be showered by magical internet money. And that's what skews those numbers. That's the 25% of people who just aren't even trying. We don't really understand why they're even bothering. So if you can reach 25 backers, if you think about that, 25 it's a little bit bigger than your mom, your best friend, your favorite college professor, the folks who are sort of morally obligated to back your campaign. If you can reach a little bit beyond that, if you've done a professional campaign, if you've conceived your idea well, if you've messaged it, if you understand how to promote it, your chances of success on this platform are incredibly high.
That's encouraging. So what kind of projects are you not seeing on Kickstarter that you really wish you would?
I spent a lot of time in the winter getting in touch with bookstores. We have seen a lot of bookstore campaigns on the site, but I had hoped that I might be able to help ease some of the, concerns during COVID by helping bookstores raise some funds. Actually, the one that got the closest is my local bookstore, which is in Greenpoint here in Brooklyn. And they, we talked about it a lot, and they wound up saying, we're doing such a brisk trade in online orders. We actually don't feel right saying that we desperately need money right now. And so they elected not to do it, which was, the best reason I could think of for them not to do it. I mean, certainly I personally want that store to exist forever. I was biking to pick up books there every other week during COVID. It was one of like my only outings during the quarantines. So that's something I have not seen as much of lately. I haven't really thought about that. What am I not seeing? I more notice what I am seeing. We're seeing a really incredible array of very diverse children's books, particularly multilingual children's books and children's books that are sort of elevating marginalized cultures in really, really beautiful ways. We're seeing a lot of art books, which is, there's, an array of that, but like one segment of it is comics artists who have worked for a long time in the mainstream comics industries, drawing other people's creations, who are saying, what, here are the characters I really like to draw. Here's the stuff that I've been working on, at night before bed that no one's paying me for, collating them into like really lovely books just for their fans. I've kind of turned your question backward. Sorry about that.
That's
I don't know.
right.
I mean, the projects that are missing from Kickstarter are yours. What are you going to bring me?
Nice. That's a good one. Someone would like to you to explain a little bit more about your partnership with bookshop.org.
I would love to. I'll even link to it. So for those who are unfamiliar, why did I think? Oh, here it is. Bookshop, like Kickstarter, is a public benefit corporation. Bookshop's whole deal is they're an online bookseller trying to run as a counter to Great God Amazon, which is, ruining the publishing industry, and Bookshop is trying to do their part to, they contribute money from sales of all of their books to independent bookstores. They do a lot of really lovely initiatives. So one of the things that they do, they have an affiliate program where anybody, a bookstore, a book club, an author can make an affiliate list of books for sale on Bookshop. And then a part of any commission they get from those sales will go either to them and or to a independent bookstore of their choice. So I worked on this partnership as a celebration of Kickstarter's $200 million pledged milestone. What I wanted to show was that books that start on Kickstarter, many of them go on to lead much longer lives, including in the traditional book trade. So I put together 5 lists, books, comic books, children's books, cookbooks, and art books that had been initially funded on Kickstarter and now are for sale and distribution through Ingram, which is the main distribution company for the publishing industry. So that's what these lists are. So you can see every single one of these books started with a Kickstarter campaign. And the final part of this partnership, we didn't want the commission money to go back to Kickstarter. There was no goal for us to make money here. So all of our commissions are funneled to this beautiful organization called NYC Books Through Bars, which is kind of an old punk nonprofit, all volunteer run, that sends books for free to incarcerated people all across the country. So you're helping them too if you buy any books from our Bookshop storefront.
That's great. Well, we're a big fan of lists here, so I'm wondering if anyone else has any questions. Let's see, there's some more. So Lisa's wondering if about how diverse is your pool of creators? Is that something you're able to identify?
Yeah, well, so, we don't keep demographic data, so we don't have like statistics about that. But as I said, many of the early adopters of Kickstarter and some of our like most prominent creators, particularly in my categories, are folks who are from and speaking directly to marginalized populations, largely because those kinds of projects have long been ignored by the gatekeepers in the traditional publishing industry. One of the earliest Kickstarter success stories in comics is a woman named Spike Trotman. She's a Black woman in Chicago. I think she was on Kickstarter within its first year, after having been having had no luck trying to get her books published in the mainstream. Within 2 or 3 years, she had raised $1 million for over her several Kickstarter campaigns. She then started her own publishing company called Iron Circus, which publishes almost exclusively work by Black and Brown creators. Another big story about that, Kwanzaa Ofeyemo, his book Black. He got famously, I think, I don't remember how many, 50 rejections from mainstream publishers for a comic book about a world in which only Black people have superpowers. He ran a Kickstarter and it went extremely viral. He raised a huge amount of money. And before the campaign had even ended, there were several traditional publishers in his inbox saying, oh, wait, now we'd like to publish you, now that you've proven that there actually is an audience for this kind of work. So we see stories about that all the time. So how diverse is it? As diverse as it's always been a really strong and supportive home for diverse creators. And we hope that it will always be that way.
And so it seems like you're able to see that more based on the products on display rather than the producers themselves. Like, this is the body of work, that's being shown, so you're not really looking at, who's creating, you're looking at what the creations are. When you say that, would that be a fair thing to?
Well, maybe, I think Kickstarter does have a bit of sort of like, it's very creator driven. So I think it's pretty common to be as focused on who the creator is as on what they're creating, both, in the campaign and its messaging, that sort of thing. That's why also you see people who, run multiple campaigns, they really assemble like a very strong support network because they've proven themselves over multiple projects to be trustworthy. And so I think it's both. I think both the creator and the creation.
Okay, interesting. And outside of the US, where do you think Kickstarter has its largest impact or its largest audience?
Yeah, our biggest, I don't know this off the top of my head. The UK is our second largest audience for sure. We've done a lot of work in Japan. There's a pretty big Kickstarter community in Sweden. Kickstarter, anyone from anywhere in the world can back a Kickstarter campaign, but you can only launch a Kickstarter campaign if you are in a country where Stripe is enabled to do money transfers. So for example, you can't launch a campaign from India, from Cuba, from Iraq. I don't know all of them, but the answer is Kickstarter's big wherever a bunch of creators have, decided that this was the thing to do and kind of come together. I get that question about when I was doing, I used to run the journalism category. And so people would ask me like, well, which state has the most journalism backers? And the answer was New York, Chicago, and LA, because the 3 largest ever journalism campaigns were for local newspapers in New York, Chicago, and LA. So these questions are sort of like self-reinforcing.
It's kind of like what you mentioned about I attended one of your other talk where you talk about like a good video kind of leads to a good campaign, but you can't really prove it.
Well, right. Yeah, we do see that campaigns that have videos tend to do well more quickly and raise more money, et cetera. But exactly, like there's no way of knowing, are they doing better because they have a video, or is it that a campaign that has a video is likely to be, a more professionally produced and run campaign? So, do your best, do the best campaign you have, message it as clearly as possible, know how to reach both the audience that you have and the audience that you want, and you'll probably do pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, here's another one. Does the Kickstarter policy display the campaign creators' legal names? Is it still Kickstarter's policy to display?
No, that's definitely not our policy. That's actually a question for our trust and safety team. I would not want you to quote me on it, but I know definitely I've worked with creators who are working under a pseudonym. I think, again, please, you would need to, if this is a real, question for you as a creator, you're going to want to get in touch with our support team. But I believe your legal name will need to exist somewhere internally, but it does not need to be external or public facing.
So mostly, my understanding, to be so that you can get paid, but it doesn't have to be on the public face.
Right, exactly. I mean, it has to Stripe, actually, not even us, has to verify that like you are who you say you are and you are connected to the bank account that you've listed, to get your money. But yeah, you do not have to put your government issued name in a public way if you don't want to do that.
Excellent. James Powell has a question. Can he ask it? Would you mind asking that question, James?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to just interrupt it randomly. But yeah, so I have some friends who do Kickstarter campaigns, and we've spoken about that dead zone in the middle where the first 48 hours, the last 48 hours are crazy fun and exciting. And in the middle, there's that dip. And I know a lot of people struggle with the 30 days, trying to find reasons to promote and talking about it. And it's just, I don't want to say it's a slog by any means, but people have real jobs too. And so I'm just curious, if we're bringing our own audiences for the most part, does the duration matter as much as we think it does?
Only each creator will need to answer that question for themselves. You're absolutely right. Nearly every campaign ever on Kickstarter has a plateau in the middle. I don't know if I would say a word like dead zone. That makes me really sad. But yeah, it can be bleak. It's a bit of a slog in the middle. The vast majority of your action is going to happen the first week and the last week for sure. So the answer is it depends on what kind of campaign you're running and like what you're doing to run it. People have certainly asked me, well, like, why don't I just run a campaign for 4 days then? You would need everything to happen exactly as you want it to, like the moment you want it to be able to like have the full force work in just 4 days. If you are, for example, coordinating a lot of signal boosting from other people, if you're, going on a podcast, if you're, trying to get some press from the media, like now you're depending on other people's timelines to even do the thing, even if that's just to give you a retweet. They might not get to it for a week. If you're going to be in someone's newsletter, they might not get to it for a week, and then their readers might not click that newsletter open for a week. So you do want to give enough time for like the things that you're starting to actually develop and like bear fruit the way you want them to. Certainly the worst thing that could, not the worst, but a bad thing that could happen is if you get a terrific piece of press that comes out the day after your campaign has closed. So keep in mind the other timelines that are sort of like surrounding you. That said, I am increasingly seeing people run 3-week campaigns instead of 4. There's not a requirement that it has to be exactly 30 days. And if you are, you've done a bunch of campaigns, if you're really finding that that plateau in the middle is too long, do an experiment, run your next campaign 4 or 5 days shorter, see what happens. This is all an iterative process. So that's what I would say about that.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you very much.
That's great. I'm wondering if I can introduce you to one of our bloggers, Jade, who, when I spoke to her last, had a few questions for you. Is that still true?
Not so much.
We can anticipate everything.
Almost, pretty much. I've watched your previous videos too and did some research on you. So I was like, oh, those questions have been answered now, especially with James in the room. So thank you so much. But I did notice that Janet did have a question, so I can go ahead and ask that question. So what are the top 5 tips for things to do for to achieve your campaign, just to get it good?
Yeah, totally. I feel like that's, you'd think that I might have a top 5. I don't, but here's what I'll do instead. I just found this, a repeat creator named Jimmy Palmiotti, he's live on the site right now with his latest book, which is called Rage. He had a wonderful quote from an article on AIPT Comics yesterday. My Kickstarter secret should not be a secret. It should be how everyone runs campaigns. Respect the audience, make the best book possible, communicate with backers, and deliver on time every time. It's really not rocket science running a Kickstarter campaign. You need to message it well. You need to be able to explain clearly to your backers what you're doing. You want to have exciting rewards that are going to thrill and delight the people who are supporting you on this creative journey. You want to know how to reach the audience that you have and the audience that you want. And you need to have not bitten off more than you can chew. You need to really be able, a Kickstarter campaign might only be 3 weeks, but you're going to be months beyond that making the thing once you funded it. So you got to know that you can actually deliver on the promises that you've made to make your audience, you know, to fulfill the promises that you've made to them, and put you in a position to do it all again the next time.
That was a great quote. Yeah,
here
it encompasses it.
I'll give you, I mean, I'm sharing my tweet where I retweeted his quote, whatever, but was the easiest way for me to find it.
We'll take it.
You mentioned having like amazing rewards. As someone, because I'm considering, you know, doing a Kickstarter maybe next year, like for the first one, should I even have rewards? Like, should it just be the product? That's kind of my plan. No.
I mean, look, you know, people do that for sure. You can do that, but I would say the sort of like rewards are really central to the Kickstarter proposition in my mind. I mean, you know, if you're making a comic and you just want that comic to exist in the world, totally go ahead, run the campaign just as a pre-sale for that comic book. But rewards are really how you can like make your backers very excited. So just like a quick little overview of how I think about rewards. Whatever your book is, that's going to be like your main tier. Let's say you're going to be $25 for a print book, maybe $15 for your ebook. You want to think about going above and below those. So below your book tier, I highly recommend digital rewards. And these can be fun and exciting. You can do a playlist of songs that you listen to while you were writing. You can do, you know, a pretty PDF of like further reading of books that inspire you. On higher tiers, you can do, you know, if you're an editor, you can offer a poetry consultation. If you know, want to throw a launch party, you know, virtual or IRL, you can put that as a high tier reward. You can do prints of the art on the cover or in your book. In comics, we're constantly seeing for $200, I'll write you into the story, or your dog if you send me a picture. You know, if you go to our creator tips page, we have actually 2 different roundups. One is 96 reward ideas you haven't thought of. And then we did a reboot last year that's like 72 rewards that you can make and fulfill in quarantine. Think about all of the elements of the creative journey that you're going to be taking, and like things that will make your backers excited, and try to offer those, because that's how you build these like really strong bonds, you know, between yourself and your readers. It's how you make them feel really part of, you know, the journey to make the thing that you're making. And you will notice I did not mention any swag. I did not talk about t-shirts or tote bags or mugs, because there's this persistent perception that if you run a Kickstarter campaign, you must turn yourself into a swag production facility. And it is not true. In fact, you must not do that. That is the way to ruin your life. You know, the worst thing, I don't know, maybe not the worst, I keep saying that, but like a bad outcome would be you've raised $10,000, you're ready to write this book, but instead you have to figure out how to produce t-shirts and mail mugs without them breaking. And who wants another tote bag? Why are they, you know, you don't have to do any of that stuff. Think about ways that are, like I said, pieces of the creative journey that you're already taking, notes from the field, outtakes that didn't make it into the book. Think about who's in your community. Maybe someone you know knits beautiful scarves and wants to donate a couple to your campaign, or has written novels and wants to give you some signed copies. These are all things that are like, first of all, way less onerous to produce and ship. And just secondly, like way more delightful to your backers.
Oh no, I love that. Like just outreach to your own community like that. That's an excellent idea. Wow. I feel inspired now.
That's my whole goal.
That's amazing. Wow, there's so information dense. I think I've run out of questions, Oriana. Can you believe it? Can I open up the conversation to anyone else who has any questions? Bueller, anyone?
This has been awesome. Yeah. I just have one kind of dumb question, but I'm curious. I get emails all the time from Kickstarter promoting certain projects. How does Kickstarter decide what projects they're actually promoting themselves?
Yeah, it's not me actually, it's our editorial team. That's their whole job, is figuring out which projects to elevate and how and where to elevate them. I do get to make recommendations for the projects I'm working with, projects that I see on the site that I think really exemplify what Kickstarter can be and should be. But yeah, the final choices all rest with our editorial team, that's their whole job, is to figure out how to do that in like a broad and equanimous sort of way.
And how about a little prognostication? What do you see coming down the pipeline? What's in store for Kickstarter in the future?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I can tell you areas that I think that I hope to encourage as growth areas. On the comics side, I'm really looking a lot at web comics. I think, someone who already knows how to build an audience online for their digital work is someone who's probably very well positioned, assuming they can figure out the mechanics of book production, how to go from pixels to a page. I feel like that's a really rich area. I've been looking a lot at manga. I think there's been an increasing amount of manga on the site, and I think there could be a lot more. I think that's a community with strong ties between creators and readers. And I think could be some really good growth there. On the publishing side, I am seeing, as I said, just like incredible diversity in children's books. I expect there'll be more and more of that. I just spoke to a group a couple of weeks ago working specifically in children's books. What's really exciting about the children's books particularly is it's like people running just one campaign, whereas comics, it's a lot more repeat creators who are sort of like doing this over and over and over. People come, they do one children's book campaign and make their book, and that's it. So there's just this constant replenishment of new creators, first-time creators, which I think is a joy. I also think there's a lot of growth to be had in the self-publishing arena. Kickstarter's got a very vibrant sci-fi and fantasy community, and I think the same could happen for romance novels, for westerns, for horror, particularly those in genres who are self-publishing. So I don't know. Those are kind of like prophecies that I'm hoping will be self-fulfilling, because that's where I'm going to be dedicating a lot of my time. So I don't know. Have me back in a year. I'll let you know if any of them came true.
You might have some volunteers here to help out.
Great.
Well, I'm looking at our chat, and I think there's one more. Yeah, no more questions there. You've answered more questions that I could have even come up with. And I wasn't expecting to interview you today, so this has been very interesting.
Well, this was very lovely. I don't know. I feel like I should have some sort of like closing pieces of wisdom for 5 minutes, but I hope that I was able to inspire you, that, Kickstarter allows you to really take your creative destiny into your own hands. And I hope everybody decides to run a campaign. I think it's really fun, really wonderful. It's an incredible learning experience. Yeah, I'd love to see you all on the platform.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Oriana.
Yeah, we'd all like to give you a big thank you for your time. This has been really great.
Cool, wonderful. Well, I hope you all, thank you so much for having me. This is always really, really fun to get to do these conversations. Find me online, tell me what you're working on, and I hope everybody has a really lovely rest of your day.